The morning at the small cafe moved quietly until a large man deliberately slammed into a corner table. Coffee splashed across the shirt of the man sitting there. Laughter erupted. A few customers joined in like it was harmless fun. The man in the wet shirt did not yell. He did not argue. He stood slowly and locked eyes with the one who hit him. That stare cut through the noise. The entire cafe went silent in a single breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Who was this man? And why did everyone suddenly feel like they were holding their breath? The man in the corner booth had arrived early that Saturday morning. He chose that table for a reason. His back was against the wall. He could see the entrance and the entire room without turning his head. Old habits stayed long after the need for them had disappeared. Ethan Cross sat with his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. He wore a faded gray Henley and jeans that had seen better days. Nothing about him suggested he wanted conversation. His face carried the kind of stillness that came from years of watching and waiting. 44 years old, lean, unremarkable to anyone who did not know where to look. The watch on his left wrist was not the kind sold in shopping malls. It was military issue, scratched, functional. The sort of thing a man kept because it had been through what he had been through. He was not reading. He was not scrolling through his phone. He was simply there, present, aware of every movement in the room without appearing to notice any of it. The cafe was small and locally owned. The kind of place where the coffee was strong and the pastries came from a bakery 2 blocks away. Ethan liked it because it was quiet in the mornings. He could think here. He could breathe here. He could forget for a little while that the world had once demanded everything from him and that he had given it willingly. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down at the screen. A text from his daughter. She was 12. Her name was Lily. The message was short and sweet, the way all her messages were. Do not forget. Pick up at 3:15. Love you, Dad. He typed back with one hand, his eyes still scanning the room from habit. I will not forget. Love you too. He set the phone down and looked out the window at the quiet street beyond. Lily was the reason he was still here. She was the reason he had walked away from everything else. Her mother had died when she was 6 years old. Cancer, fast and brutal, the way the worst things always were. Ethan had been overseas when it started. By the time he made it home, the doctors were already talking about months instead of years. He sat by her bed every day until the end. He held her hand when she took her last breath. He left the service 3 weeks after the funeral. No one argued with his decision. No one asked him to stay. They understood what he had lost and what he needed to do now. 16 years in the Army, multiple deployments to places most Americans had never heard of, and he walked away without looking back, because raising a daughter alone was more important than anything he had ever done in uniform. It was harder, too. Harder than Fallujah, harder than Kandahar, harder than any mission he had ever been assigned. There were no clear objectives when you were a single father. No teams to rely on, no backup coming over the hill. Just him and a little girl who cried in the middle of the night and asked questions he did not know how to answer. He learned. He adapted. That was what soldiers did. He became the kind of father who braided hair before school and knew the names of all her friends. He showed up to every soccer game, even when he was exhausted from working double shifts. He read bedtime stories until his voice gave out, and then read some more because she asked him to. Now she was 12 going on 20, smart as a whip and twice as sharp. She was at her friend Emma's house right now, probably still in her pajamas, watching cartoons and eating cereal, laughing at something only 12-year-olds found funny. She did not know what her father had done before she was born. She knew he had been in the Army. She knew he had traveled to dangerous places. She knew he did not like to talk about it. That was enough. She did not need to know the rest. The cafe started to fill up as the morning progressed. It was Saturday, after all. Families came in with strollers and diaper bags. College students claimed tables and spread out their laptops like they were setting up camp. A line formed at the counter. The noise level rose steadily. Voices overlapped. The espresso machine hissed and gurgled. Someone laughed too loud at a joke that probably was not that funny. Ethan did not mind the noise. He had learned to filter sound, to separate what mattered from what did not. It was a skill that had kept him alive in war zones. Now it just helped him enjoy his coffee in peace. He finished his mug and considered ordering another. That was when Miller walked in. Ethan recognized him immediately. Everyone who came here regularly recognized Miller. He was the kind of man who made sure you did. Tall and broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 30s. He wore a leather jacket even though it was not cold enough for one. He moved through the cafe like he owned it, loud and entitled. The kind of person who believed the world owed him space and attention simply because he demanded it. Miller had a habit of pushing boundaries. He cut in line without apology. He spoke over people like their words did not matter. He made jokes at the expense of others and expected them to laugh along. Most people did. It was easier than confrontation, easier than making a scene. Ethan had seen him before. He had watched the way Miller treated the staff, dismissive and demanding, the way he leaned too close when he talked to women, invading their space like it belonged to him, the way he made himself the center of every room he entered, whether anyone wanted him there or not. Ethan had stayed out of it. It was not his business. He was just here for the coffee. Miller walked past the counter without ordering anything. He scanned the room like he was looking for something. His eyes landed on Ethan in the corner booth. Something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the need to prove something. Maybe he just did not like the way Ethan sat there so quietly, so contained, so obviously unimpressed by everything around him. Ethan did not look away. He simply met Miller's gaze and held it for a second before returning his attention to his empty mug. A clear message. I see you. I am not interested. Miller changed direction. He walked straight toward the corner booth. His stride was deliberate, confident, the walk of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. He moved between tables without excusing himself. A woman with a laptop had to pull her chair in to let him pass. She did not say anything. Miller did not acknowledge her. Ethan saw him coming. He did not move. He sat perfectly still, his hands on the table, his breathing even. He knew what was about to happen. He had seen men like Miller before. Men who mistook silence for weakness. Men who needed to dominate because they had nothing else. Miller reached the table. He did not stop. He turned his body at the last second and slammed his hip into the corner of it, hard and intentional. The impact made the table lurch. Ethan's mug tipped over. Coffee spilled across the surface and dripped onto his lap. The liquid was still warm. It soaked through the denim and spread across his thigh. Miller stepped back and looked down at the mess he had created. He grinned. It was not the kind of grin that suggested apology or embarrassment. It was the grin of someone who had just done exactly what he intended to do. "Whoa," Miller said, his voice carrying across the cafe. "My bad, man. Didn't see you there." The lie was obvious. Everyone within 10 feet had seen what happened. Miller had walked directly into the table. There was no accident, no mistake, just a man testing another man to see what he would do. Ethan looked down at the coffee spreading across his jeans. He looked at the puddle forming on the floor. Then he looked up at Miller. He did not speak. He simply waited. Miller's grin widened. He glanced around the room, feeding off the attention. A few people were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious, like they were waiting for a show. One man near the window had his phone out, probably ready to record whatever happened next. "You should probably clean that up," Miller said. He made no move to help. He made no move to leave. He just stood there, watching, waiting for a reaction. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. It was not anger. Not yet. It was the thing that came before anger. The quiet calculation of whether a situation was worth the cost of responding. He thought about Lily. He thought about the promise he had made to himself when her mother died. He would be there for his daughter. He would stay out of trouble. He would not let old instincts pull him into places he could not afford to go. But this was different. This was not a stranger bumping into him by accident. This was not a misunderstanding that could be laughed off. This was deliberate, public, a challenge wrapped in a false apology. And if he did nothing, Miller would do it again. To someone else. To someone who could not handle it the way Ethan could. He had walked away from a lot of fights in his life. He had swallowed a lot of pride. He had learned that being a good father sometimes meant being the bigger man, even when it hurt, even when every fiber of his being wanted to respond with the violence he had been trained for. But there was a line. There was always a line between keeping the peace and allowing yourself to be disrespected in front of a room full of strangers. Between turning the other cheek and becoming a doormat, Miller had just crossed that line. Ethan stood up. Slowly, carefully. He did not brush the coffee off his jeans. He did not reach for napkins. He simply rose to his full height and looked Miller directly in the eye. He was not as tall as Miller, not as broad. But something in the way he stood made Miller take a half step back before he caught himself. There was a stillness to Ethan that most people never developed. A centeredness that came from absolute certainty about who he was and what he was capable of. The cafe went quiet. The conversations did not stop all at once. They faded one by one as people noticed the tension. The two men facing each other in the corner. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause. "You need to walk away," Ethan said. His voice was low, controlled. Each word deliberate. Miller blinked. He had expected anger. Maybe shouting. Maybe a shove he could respond to. He had not expected this. The calm, the certainty, the complete absence of fear. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh and looking around the room for support. "Or what?" he said, spreading his arms wide like he was inviting applause. "You going to make me?" Ethan did not answer. He just waited. His hands stayed at his sides, loose and relaxed. His weight stayed balanced, centered. He was not threatening. He was not aggressive. He was simply present, immovable. A wall that Miller had not expected to hit. The choice was Miller's now. He could walk away. He could de-escalate. He could laugh it off and leave Ethan alone. But men like Miller did not walk away. Not when people were watching. Not when walking away looked like losing. Miller stepped closer. He invaded the space between them until they were almost chest to chest. Close enough that Ethan could smell the cologne mixed with something sharper underneath. Maybe bourbon. Maybe whiskey. Day drinking would explain a lot about Miller's behavior. Ethan did not move. He did not flinch. He stood exactly where he was and looked at Miller with the kind of patience that came from knowing how this would end. He had been in worse positions, with worse men, in worse places. This was a coffee shop in the middle of a Saturday morning. This was not Fallujah. This was not Kandahar. This was just a man who had never learned the difference between strength and bullying. "You deaf or something?" Miller said, louder now, playing to the audience. "I asked you a question." Ethan let the question hang in the air. He was counting in his head, but not out of anger. Out of training. He was measuring distances, calculating angles, identifying exits. It was automatic. Muscle memory. The kind of thing that happened without conscious thought when a situation moved from uncomfortable to potentially dangerous. His mind went to Lily again. She would be at Emma's house right now. Safe, happy, completely unaware that her father was standing in a cafe facing down a drunk bully who wanted to prove something. She did not need a father who got arrested for fighting in public. She did not need a father who let his pride override his judgment. She needed a father who picked her up at 3:15, who made dinner, who helped with homework, who showed up. "Apologize and leave," Ethan said. His voice was quieter this time. Quieter, but somehow harder. "That's the last time I'm going to say it." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Miller blinked again. His smirk faltered for half a second before he forced it back into place. He looked around the room. More people were watching now. The college student near the window had his phone up. The camera was pointed directly at them. Miller saw it. He fed off it. He turned back to Ethan and laughed. "You think you're tough?" Miller said. He leaned in another inch. His breath was warm against Ethan's face. "You think sitting there in your little corner makes you special?" Ethan's expression did not change. He was reading Miller now. The way he stood, the way he distributed his weight, the way his right hand kept flexing into a loose fist. Miller was working himself up, building momentum, convincing himself that whatever came next was justified. The air in the cafe had changed completely. The conversations had stopped. Everyone was watching now. Sarah, the young barista behind the counter, stood frozen with a pitcher of steamed milk in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked like she wanted to call someone, but did not know who. An older man near the door stood up. He was in his 60s, with a gray beard and a flannel shirt. He took a step toward them and then stopped when his wife grabbed his arm and shook her head. He sat back down. No one else moved. No one intervened. They just watched, wanting to see what would happen but not wanting to be part of it. Miller noticed the attention. It fueled him. He straightened up slightly and raised his voice another notch. "You know what your problem is," he said. He was performing now, playing to the room. "You think you can just sit there and ignore people. You think you're better than everyone else." Ethan let him talk. Words were just noise. They did not matter. What mattered was what came after the words. What mattered was the moment when Miller decided that talking was not enough. That moment was coming. Ethan could feel it building. He could see it in the way Miller's shoulders tensed, in the way his breathing quickened, in the way his eyes flicked down to Ethan's chest like he was choosing a target. Miller's right hand came up fast. He shoved Ethan's shoulder with the heel of his palm. Not a punch. Not yet. Just a test. A provocation. An invitation to escalate. Ethan absorbed the impact. His body rocked back slightly and then settled. He did not shove back. He did not grab Miller's wrist. He just stood there and let the moment breathe. Sarah had her phone pressed to her ear now. Ethan could see her lips moving but could not hear what she was saying. Probably calling the police. Good. Let them come. Let them sort this out. He could wait. He was good at waiting, but Miller was not good at waiting. The shove had not gotten the reaction he wanted. Ethan had not fought back, had not even flinched. It made Miller look weak, made him look like he was picking on someone who would not defend himself. That was not the story Miller wanted to tell. He needed resistance. He needed a fight. He needed Ethan to give him an excuse. Miller shoved again, harder this time. Both hands against Ethan's chest. The force was real, aggressive, meant to knock him back into the wall. Ethan moved with it. He took 2 steps backward and used the momentum to create distance. His spine touched the wall behind him. He stopped. He stood. He waited. "Come on!" Miller shouted. His face was red now. Spit flew from his mouth with every word. "Do something. Hit me. I know you want to." Ethan did not want to. That was the thing Miller could not understand. Ethan did not need to prove anything, did not need to win, did not need to establish dominance or save face or play to a crowd. He had already won more fights than Miller would ever know about. He had survived things that would have broken most men. He had nothing left to prove to anyone, especially not to a drunk bully in a coffee shop. But Miller was not done. He could not be done. Not while people were watching. Not while phones were recording. He had committed now. He had pushed this too far to back down. His pride would not let him. His ego would not let him. So he made the choice that Ethan had known he would make from the beginning. Miller threw a punch. It came from his right side. A wide looping hook aimed at Ethan's jaw. Telegraphed. Slow. The kind of punch someone threw when they had never been trained. When they had never faced someone who knew how to fight, Ethan saw it coming from a mile away. He had time to think, time to choose, time to decide how this would end. He could duck, let the punch sail over his head, let Miller stumble forward off balance, walk away while he was recovering. But that would not stop this. Miller would come again, would escalate further, would hurt someone eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not Ethan, but someone. So Ethan moved. It was not dramatic, it was not flashy, it was just precise. He shifted his weight to his left foot and turned his shoulders. He slipped inside Miller's guard as the punch passed through empty air where his head had been a split second before. His left hand came up and caught Miller's extended wrist. His right hand locked onto Miller's elbow. Basic control holds. The kind taught in every military combatives course. The kind that worked because they relied on leverage and anatomy instead of raw strength. Ethan rotated Miller's arm. Not hard, not fast, just firm and controlled. Miller's body followed the movement because it had no choice. The shoulder joint only moved in certain directions. Fight it, and something would tear. Follow it, and you stayed intact. Miller's brain understood that, even if his pride did not, in 3 seconds flat, Miller was facing the wall. His right arm was pinned behind his back at an angle that made movement impossible. His left hand was pressed flat against the brick. Ethan stood behind him, close, controlling the angle, controlling the pressure. Enough to hold, not enough to damage. Miller struggled. His muscles tensed as he tried to push back, tried to twist free. Ethan adjusted. Small movements, tiny shifts in pressure that looked effortless but were the product of thousands of hours of training, of sparring, of live combat where mistakes cost lives. From the outside, it looked like Ethan was barely trying. "Stop moving," Ethan said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You're going to hurt yourself." Miller did not stop. He jerked his shoulder, tried to throw an elbow with his free arm. Ethan increased the pressure just enough to freeze him in place. Not enough to dislocate anything, just enough to send a very clear message. Keep fighting, and this gets worse. The cafe was absolutely silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Sarah stood behind the counter with her phone still pressed to her ear, her mouth slightly open. The college student by the window had lowered his phone. His face was pale. The older man in the flannel shirt sat with his mouth hanging open. His wife had her hand pressed over her heart. No one had expected this. They had expected a brawl. Shouting. Wild swings. Maybe broken furniture. They had not expected efficiency. Control, a man who moved like violence, was a language he had spoken for so long that it required no thought, no effort, no emotion. Ethan held Miller against the wall and waited for the fight to drain out of him, waited for reality to sink in, waited for the moment when Miller understood that he had made a very serious mistake about the quiet man in the corner booth. Miller stopped struggling. The fight drained out of him all at once, like air escaping from a punctured balloon. His muscles went slack, his breathing turned ragged. The bravado was gone. The performance was over. Ethan felt the shift. Felt the moment when resistance became compliance. He held the position for 3 more seconds, long enough to be absolutely sure. Then he released the pressure and stepped back. Miller turned around slowly. His face was flushed. His eyes were wide. He looked at Ethan like he was seeing him for the first time. Like the last 30 seconds had rewritten everything he thought he knew about the world. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Ethan put distance between them. 2 steps, then 3. He moved to the side so he was not blocking Miller against the wall, giving him space, giving him an exit. The stance was deliberate and non-threatening. Ethan's hands hung loose at his sides. His weight was centered. He was not pursuing, not pressing, just holding the boundary he had set. Sirens cut through the silence. Faint at first, then louder, growing closer. Miller's head snapped toward the sound. Panic flickered across his face. He looked at Ethan. looked at the door, looked back at Ethan. Ethan shook his head once. A small movement, a clear message. Do not run. Miller stayed where he was. 2 police cruisers pulled up outside, lights flashing. 4 officers came through the door, moving with the kind of careful speed that said they had been told there was an active fight, that someone might be hurt, that the situation might still be escalating. The first officer through the door was young, late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back tight. Her hand rested on her belt, near her radio. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the crowd, the phones, the 2 men standing near the back wall. The second officer was older, 50, maybe 55. Gray at his temples, a weathered face that had seen too many Saturday morning calls like this one. His name tag, said Daniels. He moved slower than his partner, more deliberate. His eyes found Ethan first and stayed there. Something passed across his face. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. He said something quietly to the younger officer. She nodded and moved toward Miller. Officer Daniels walked toward Ethan. His posture was relaxed but alert. The walk of someone who had done this enough times to know that assumptions could get you hurt. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if he needed to. You want to tell me what happened here? Daniels asked. His voice was calm. Ethan met his eyes directly. He did not look away, did not fidget, did not rush to explain or defend himself. He just stood there and let the officer assess him. It was the same thing Ethan had been doing since Miller walked into the cafe. Reading, measuring, waiting. He knocked over my table, Ethan said. He gestured to the corner booth where the spilled coffee was still pooled on the surface and dripping onto the floor. Deliberately. Then he took a swing. Daniels looked at the table, looked at the stain on Ethan's jeans, looked back at Ethan's face. His eyes dropped briefly to the watch on Ethan's wrist. Standard military issue. The kind you could not buy in stores. The kind you earned. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. And what did you do? Daniels asked. Restrained him, Ethan said simply. Didn't hit him. Didn't hurt him. Just held him until he stopped. Daniels looked over his shoulder. The younger officer had Miller against a different wall now. Different position, but the same defeated posture. She was talking to him in a low voice, taking his ID. Miller was cooperating. He looked like a balloon that had lost all its air. Sarah appeared at Daniel's shoulder. She still had her phone in her hand. Her voice shook slightly when she spoke. That's true, she said. She pointed at Miller. That guy came in and went straight for him. She pointed at Ethan. Knocked his table on purpose, started pushing him. Everyone saw it. The older man in the flannel shirt stood up and walked over. His wife let go of his arm this time. She's right, he said. His voice was rough from a lifetime of cigarettes or hard work or both. The big guy started it. This one here just defended himself. Didn't do more than he had to. Daniels looked at Ethan again. Really looked this time. Took in the way he stood, the way he held himself, the way his eyes tracked movement without his head turning, the watch, the faded clothes, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. You ex-military? Daniels asked. It was not really a question. It was confirmation. Ethan nodded once. What branch? Army. How long? 16 years. Daniels waited. When Ethan did not offer more, he did not push. He just nodded like he had gotten exactly the answer he expected. He turned toward his partner and gave a small hand signal. She nodded back and started walking Miller toward the door. Am I being arrested? Miller's voice cracked on the last word. He just sounded scared. You're being removed for disturbing the peace, the younger officer said evenly. We'll talk outside. Miller looked back at Ethan one more time. His expression was complicated. Fear, embarrassment, maybe something that looked almost like respect. He did not say anything. He just turned and walked out with the officer's hand on his elbow. Daniels watched them go. Then he turned back to Ethan. You want to press charges? He asked. Ethan shook his head. You want a report filed? Another shake. You sure? We got witnesses. We probably got video. Daniels glanced at the college student who was still holding his phone. We could make a case if you wanted. I'm sure, Ethan said. I just want to go home. Daniels studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. If you change your mind, he said, or if that guy comes back around, you call me. Ethan took the card and slipped it into his back pocket without looking at it. Daniels reached out and offered his hand. Ethan shook it. The grip was firm. Mutual respect between two men who had both seen things they did not talk about. Thank you for your service, Daniels said quietly. Then, louder, to the room. Anyone who recorded video of this incident, I need you to delete it right now. This is not entertainment. This is not content. Someone could have been seriously hurt. The college student looked down at his phone. He tapped the screen a few times and held it up to show Daniels. The video was gone. A few other people around the cafe did the same, deleting, confirming. Daniels nodded his appreciation. He looked at Ethan one more time, tipped his head slightly in acknowledgement, and then walked out. The door closed behind him. The lights from the cruisers faded as they pulled away. The cafe exhaled. Conversation started again, quietly at first, then louder. People returned to their coffee, their laptops, their Saturday mornings, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a different quality to the air now, a lesson that no one had asked for but everyone had received. Sarah came over with a towel. She handed it to Ethan without saying anything. He took it, wiped the coffee off the table, and dropped the towel in the trash. He looked at his watch, 11:47. He had hours before he needed to pick up Lily, but he did not want to stay here anymore, did not want to be looked at, did not want questions. He walked to the counter. Sarah was back behind it now. Her hands were steadier than before. How much for the coffee? Ethan asked. She shook her head. It's on the house. I'd rather pay. She looked at him. Really looked. Then she nodded, understanding that he needed this to feel normal. $3.50. Ethan pulled out his wallet, gave her a $5, and told her to keep the change. She smiled. Small but genuine. Thank you, she said. For not making it worse, Ethan did not respond. He just nodded and turned toward the door. The older man in the flannel shirt caught his eye as he passed. He raised his coffee cup slightly, a salute, a gesture of respect from one man to another. Ethan returned the nod and kept walking. Outside, the air was crisp and clean. Early spring in New Hampshire, the sun was bright, but not warm yet. He walked to his truck, climbed in, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, looking at the cafe through the windshield. People were still inside, still drinking coffee, still living their lives. The moment had passed. Miller was gone. The police were gone. Everything was returning to normal, except it was not really normal. Not anymore. Because now everyone in that cafe knew something they had not known before. They knew that silence was not weakness, that stillness was not surrender, that real strength was not about dominating others. It was about controlling yourself, about choosing not to cause harm even when you had every right to, about being the kind of man who could end a fight in 3 seconds but chose restraint instead. Ethan started the engine. He pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward home. He would take a shower, change his jeans, maybe make some lunch, watch something mindless on television for a few hours, and at 3:15 he would be parked outside Lily's school, waiting, like he always was, like he always would be, because that was what mattered, not what happened in a cafe, not some drunk bully who learned a hard lesson about picking fights with strangers, not the way Ethan's training had come back so easily, like muscle memory that never really went away. What mattered was being there. For the one person who needed him to be there, for the little girl who had already lost her mother and deserved a father who showed up every single time, no matter what. He turned on the radio and found a station playing something quiet and slow, Country music. The old kind, from before everything got too polished and commercial. A man singing about small towns and long roads and the things that really counted in life. Ethan drove through the quiet streets of his small town, past the hardware store where he bought supplies for his woodworking projects, past the elementary school where Lily had learned to read, past the cemetery where her mother was buried under a simple granite headstone. He did not stop at the cemetery today. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he sat there for hours, talking to a woman who could no longer answer, telling her about their daughter, about the person Lily was becoming, about how proud she would be, but not today. Today, he just wanted to go home, to be alone with his thoughts, to process what had happened and then let it go. Because that was what you did. You faced the situation, you handled it, and then you moved on. He had learned that lesson a long time ago, in places far more dangerous than a coffee shop in New Hampshire. He had learned that dwelling on violence only led to more violence, that the key to survival was not just knowing how to fight, but knowing when to stop, when to walk away, when to let the moment pass and return to the life you had built. His house was small but well-maintained, a craftsman bungalow from the 1920s that he had spent years renovating with his own hands. The porch needed repainting. The gutters needed cleaning. There was always something that needed doing when you owned an old house. He liked it that way. The work kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. It gave him something to focus on besides the memories that sometimes surfaced uninvited. The faces, the sounds, the things he had done, and the things he had seen done. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment longer, looking at the house. His house. His life. The one he had built after everything else fell apart. It was a good life. Quiet, simple, far from perfect but good enough, and in a few hours it would be filled with the sound of his daughter's voice, telling him about her sleepover, about the movies she watched, about the drama of being 12 years old in a world that sometimes seemed impossibly complicated. He would listen to every word. He would ask questions. He would pretend to be interested in things that did not interest him at all, because they interested her, and that was what mattered. That was always what mattered. He got out of the truck and walked up the porch steps. The third step creaked. It had been creaking for months. He kept meaning to fix it and kept forgetting. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. There was always time. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, empty, waiting for him to fill it with the small sounds of living. The coffee maker gurgling, the television murmuring, the creak of floorboards under his feet as he moved from room to room. He took a shower, changed into clean jeans and a fresh shirt, made himself a sandwich even though he was not really hungry, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the backyard where Lily's old swing set still stood, rusted now and unused. He should probably take it down. She was too old for it. Had been too old for years. But every time he thought about dismantling it, he remembered the little girl who used to beg him to push her higher. Higher, Daddy. Higher. Some things were harder to let go of than others. The afternoon passed slowly. He read for a while, watched the news for a while, did some work on a cabinet he was building for a client, let his mind empty out and refill with the simple rhythms of ordinary life. At 2:45, he got back in his truck and drove to the school. He was early. He was always early. He parked in his usual spot, the one with the good view of the front doors, and waited. Other parents started arriving. Minivans and SUVs pulling into the lot, forming a line. Mothers checking their phones. Fathers drumming their fingers on steering wheels. Everyone waiting for the same thing. The bell. The doors. The flood of children pouring out into the afternoon sun. 3:15 came. The bell rang. The doors opened. And there she was, Lily Cross. 12 years old. Her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that was already falling apart. She was laughing at something her friend Emma said. Her whole face lit up with the kind of joy that only children could feel so completely. She spotted his truck and waved. That big, enthusiastic wave that she had not yet learned to be embarrassed by. He waved back. She said goodbye to Emma and ran across the parking lot, yanked open the passenger door, climbed in with all the graceless energy of a 12-year-old who had not yet learned to move through the world carefully. "Hi, Dad," she said, slightly out of breath. "You're early." "I'm always early." "I know." She grinned at him, that grin that made everything else disappear. The cafe. Miller. The way violence had come back so easily after all these years, none of it mattered when she smiled at him like that. "How was the sleepover?" he asked, pulling out of the parking lot. "Amazing," she said, and launched into a detailed account of everything that had happened. The movies they watched, the pizza they ate, the way Emma's little brother kept trying to spy on them. The ghost stories that were not even scary, but they pretended to be scared anyway because that was part of the fun. Ethan listened to every word, asked questions at the right moments, laughed when she expected him to laugh, let her voice fill the truck and chase away the silence that had followed him all day. This was his life now. This was what mattered. Not the skills he had spent 16 years developing, not the things he could do with his hands when the situation demanded it. Just this. His daughter beside him, the road ahead of them, the ordinary miracle of another day together. He glanced at the watch on his wrist. The one that had been through everything with him. The scratched face, the worn band, the steady tick of seconds passing. 3:22. Just another Saturday afternoon, and he would not have it any other way.